Hello, I'm Mr. Malden, and this is the Middle School Math Toolbox. And today we have an intro to inequalities. Really, we're just talking today about solving and graphing inequalities. By the time you get to middle school, you should already know a little bit about inequalities, and that they include these symbols right here. Inequalities are just expressions, two expressions like 6 and 7 that don't equal each other. A lot of times in math, or most of the time in math, we like to deal with the expressions that equal each other, kind of like this, like 2x equals 6, and getting to a point where we can solve these expressions by undoing math, kind of like that, to be able to find out what the variable equals, all right? But we also like to deal with expressions that don't equal each other, like these two expressions. That's pretty clear. 6 does not equal 7, and so we would not put an equal sign in between. Instead, we're going to use one of these inequalities right here, all right? And you started learning this at an early age. Your teacher probably taught you something about an alligator, likes to eat the bigger quantity, okay? So you've got a mouth kind of eating the bigger quantity. So in between these two numbers, 6 and 7, 7 is greater. So the mouth is going to open up to 7, and it would read like this: 6 is less than 7, all right? So that's what you first started learning when you started learning inequalities. And then you start getting into 5th, 6th grade, and you start seeing these other ones as well, the greater than or equal to and the less than or equal to as well, saying that this expression could be less than or equal to the other side, all right? Which, if I put that equal sign right there, then I'm going to have to add something else. I'm going to have to add a variable to the mix, all right? So we could solve this equation then to be able to find out what the missing component is. So that's where we're at this point in 7th grade, is we're solving 1 and 2-step inequalities, and we're learning how to graph them. So that's the nature of today's video. But let's start easy. And let's go through a couple of these. The nature of these videos is I give you examples like the one that you see on your screen right now, and I want you to pause the video, try it yourself. So you need to have out a scratch sheet of paper as we're going through this video so that you can be able to kind of participate with me. So this one right here, the instructions is just use the correct inequality in the space provided. So if you've got 5 and 13 here, the inequality that's going to go in between them is the one that's going to tell us that 5 is less than 13, all right? And that is the one that is right there next to the less than on my screen right there. But just to say it a different way, the mouth is going to eat the 13. A lot of times I like to do this with my students. I just make it a Pac-Man, all right? And the Pac-Man likes to eat the bigger quantity, all right? All right, let's try the next one, which is going to include a negative. All right, you think about this one and think about which one is greater and have the mouth eating that quantity. All right, you should have 9 is greater than negative 15 because any positive is greater than any negative. All right, so that's just like the intro, and that's where you got to earlier on in your math careers. And now we're starting to deal with variables like this. Here's the great news. If you already know how to solve equations, all right, so if I had, x plus 3 equals 6, all right, and I want to solve that, all I'm going to do is reverse order of operations, right, to undo the math associated with the variable, which means I've got to go reverse PEMDAS, all right? I'm going to take it and undo any addition or subtraction first, then any multiplication or division. If this were an equation, that's what I would do. To undo the addition, I'd have to undo it by doing the opposite, which is to subtract them both sides, and I would find out that x equals 3. Well, the great news is if you already know how to do that, it's the same process for inequalities, with the exception of one little rule, and we're going to look at that here in just a second. But the exception of that one little rule, everything else is the same. You're just going to simply bring down the inequality that you had to begin with. Now, a common mistake with students when they're first starting to work with inequalities is they'll change that inequality to an equal sign, and x plus 3 is less than 6 simplifies to x is less than 3, It does not simplify to x is equal to 3. So be careful. Don't change the inequalities, all right? The inequality is going to stay the same as it began with the exception of the one little rule that we're going to see in just a second, all right? So you really need to pay attention to that. Be careful because that's just a common little mistake that we make, and it's just a careless mistake, all right? So it doesn't really have anything to do with the math. It just has to do with not bringing down what you see. All right, why don't you try this one? This next one. Go ahead and pause the video and try to undo the math, just like you would if it were an equation, and solve for this inequality to find out the solution set. All right, we've got w divided by 2 is greater than or equal to 12. All right, I see this division by 2 with the variable, and I want to undo that division by 2. So to undo it, I've got to do the opposite, which is to multiply on both sides. That's going to cancel out the 2's, and I'm going to have w on this side. I'm going to have 24 on this side because 12 times 2 is 24. And I'm going to be careful to bring my inequality down exactly like I see it. All right? So w divided by 2 is greater than or equal to 12. All right? If we solve that, we find out that w has to be greater than or equal to 24. All right? And so one possible solution set for w would be 24 because it could equal 24. Or it could be 25. Or anything greater than that, all right? So there you go. Pretty easy steps for solving inequalities, especially if you already know how to solve equations. If you don't know how to solve equations, I recommend that you go back and pull up my videos on solving two-step equations and one-step equations. That'll help you kind of walk through the steps for solving equations, and then you can bring those steps to the table right here for inequalities because they're the same steps, it's the same process with the exception of one little rule. And that little rule has to do with a problem like this right here. Okay. Whenever you have, all right, this is the way I'd identify it, all right, whenever you have a negative coefficient, all right, which means the number that's attached to the variable that's being multiplied by the variable, if it's negative, you're going to have to do something to this inequality right here because in order to undo the multiply by -2, you're going to have to divide by -2 on both sides, which that means those are going to cancel out. You're going to have x on this side left over. You're going to have 6 divided by 2 is 3 here. Positive divided by negative is a negative. So far, we've just done the math. Now we need to address the inequality, all right? And this is the rule, right? The one little rule, this is the only thing extra that you need to remember when it has to come to solving inequalities. All right, if you ever have to divide by a negative or multiply by a negative on both sides, you flip the sign. That's the one little rule, all right? So if you've got, in this situation right here, to undo the multiply by -2, we had to divide by -2 on both sides. We flip the sign, all right? And it has to do, the reasoning has to do with the negatives. It makes things opposite, all right? So -2x is less than 6. When you solve that, you find that the x has to be greater than -3 in order for that statement to be true. Now let's talk about this rule a little bit, all right? Because there's a lot of confusion with this, okay? When you've got, I'm going to change to the document camera to be a little bit bigger, all right? When you've got a problem like this, where you've got 2x is less than -4, in order to, let's just go ahead and solve this out, just the math. We're going to have to divide by 2 on both sides, all right, to get rid of this multiply by 2. We'll have x left over here, and we'll have -2 over here, because -4 divided by 2 is -2. All right, a lot of times students want to flip right here, all right, but you don't need a flip right here. And the reason why is because the number I divided by is positive. I'm not worried about what the number was on the other side before I did the division or what the answer is after I do the division. All you're really concerned with is what is the sign of the number that you're multiplying or dividing. If it's positive, we leave the inequality the same. If that were a negative that I were having to divide by, we would flip the inequality, all right? So you just have to remember that one little rule. When solving inequalities, they solve just like equations with the exception of one little rule, and that is if you ever have to multiply or divide by a negative, you flip the sign. All right? It doesn't have to do with adding and subtracting. So if you add negatives, subtract negatives, that will not affect the sign, all right? And it doesn't have to do with multiplication or division of positive numbers, all right? It only has to do with multiplication and division of negative numbers, all right? So keep that in mind when you're solving inequalities, all right? Remember that rule that whenever you have to multiply or divide by a negative, you flip the sign. If you can remember that rule, solving inequalities will be a cakewalk for you, all right? All right, so let's go on, and there you go. You see kind of the sign being flipped for that. Let me go back over that. We've got, just to see the animation, sometimes it sticks in our head just a little bit more. All right, again, to solve this inequality, we already did this one, but we had to divide by -2 on both sides, all right? And that divide by 2 makes us have to flip that sign, all right? All right, let's go on to solving some two-step inequalities. I've got a couple of examples for you, and so I want you to go ahead and try this. So pause the video, try to solve this two-step. This is an equation. I messed up. Let's pretend, all right, let's pretend that we see a less than or equal to. So let's just go with p divided by 4 plus 3 is less than or equal to 7, all right? Go ahead and try that one and then come back to see what the answer is. Okay, I went ahead and corrected it on my screen as well. There we go. So we've got p divided by 4 plus 3 is less than or equal to 7. All right, in order to solve this, I've got to start with subtracting 3 on both sides. And you'll see right there, we're just doing reverse order of operations. All right, so we're undoing any addition or subtraction first, and then we'll move on with the multiplication and division. All right, so those will cancel out. I have p divided by 4 on this side left over, and I have 7 minus 3, which is 4. All right, and in order to get rid of this divide by 4, I'm going to multiply by 4 on both sides. And so those 4s would cancel out. I would have p is less than or equal to 4 times 4, which is 16. Just like that, all right? And so there's the animations for that. And you can see that was our answer. All right, try this last one right here, solving this two-step, and then we're going to get to graphing. So go ahead and pause this video and solve this inequality, and then come back to see what the answer is. All right. We've got negative 3k plus 2 is greater than negative 22. All right, we're going to have to subtract 2 on both sides. That would leave us negative 3k left over here. Negative 22 minus 2 is negative 24. And then to undo the multiply by negative 3, we're going to divide by negative 3, which leaves us with k on this side, because negative 3 and negative 3 cancel out. And negative 24 divided by negative 3 gives us a positive 8. And you'll notice right here, my inequality flipped. The reason why is I divided by a negative. If you ever have to multiply or divide by a negative, the sign, the inequality, flips. All right? There you go. All right, now let's talk about graphing, and I'm just going to go ahead and put them all up there. All right, when you're graphing inequalities, all right, that means we've got a solution like this where you've got, after you've solved the inequality, you come down here and you have a solution like this where it says k is less than 8. We can move on to graphing it, all right? And the way to graph it, there's just really 4 steps. You're going to start, if it asks you to graph it, start with the number line. Right? The minimum of what you need to include on that number line is 0, so that we have reference for whatever number that we're using. All right? So we had on this one, I think it was k is less than 8 was the last one, so let's just use that one. All right? We're just going to graph this inequality. First thing, we start with the number line. Second thing, we're going to plot 8 on the number line, the answer or the solution. All right? We're going to plot 8 on the number line. Then the third step, we're going to look here at our inequality. If it does not have an equal sign down below, all right, like this right here does not have the extra equal sign. If it did, it would look like that, all right? So if your sign is less than or greater than, then you're going to put an open circle at whatever your solution number is. And the reason why is we're saying that we're going to start at that number, but we're not including that number, all right? Because k is less than 8, k cannot equal 8, and therefore we're not going to put a filled in circle at 8. We're just going to put a circle at 8, indicating that we're starting there. And then the fourth step is we're drawing our arrow. If it's less than, you're drawing an arrow to the left, just like that. You could draw it either on the number line, just like this. You could draw it above the number line, just like that, however you would like to, all right? If you draw it on the number line, you kind of need to make it distinguished from the number line itself. You can either do that by shading it in real big or just drawing a line right underneath the line, just like that. But that's how you graph it, all right? If you don't see an equal sign down below, you put an open circle, and then a less than symbol goes to the left. A greater than symbol has an arrow going to the right, and then if you have the equal sign down below, you fill it in. So let's go back to this screen, and hopefully that will make a little bit more sense. You've got these different graphs right here, and this is something you might want to just go ahead and memorize as well. It's not super hard to graph. It's really a pretty easy thing to graph, but the confusion comes in when do you put an open circle and when do you put a closed circle, all right? Open circles come if there's not an equal sign. Closed circles come if there is an equal sign, all right? So let's go on to this one right here. I want you to graph this solution for x is less than or equal to 3, all right? Because I see an equal sign, I'm going to start with the number line. It has to include 0 and 3. Because I see an equal sign, I'm going to put a closed circle at 3. And because there's a less than symbol, I'm going to have an arrow going to the left. By the way, if you're wondering, if you forget, with the less than or the greater than symbol, all right, which way the arrow goes, it kind of tells you, all right? This is pointing to the right, so we're going to, for a less than, you're going to have an arrow going to the left. You're going to have an arrow going to the left. And the greater than symbol is pointing to the right, so you're going to have an arrow going to the right, all right? Let's try this next one. X is greater than -4. All right, you don't see an equal sign, so let's just put an open circle at -4, and then the greater than symbol tells us we got an arrow going to the right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fast forward through the rest of these because I want to get to solving some of these and then graphing them, all right? You've got this statement right here. -m divided by 7 is less than or equal to 21. Go ahead and solve that and see if you can graph it as well. All right, to solve this, we're going to have to multiply by -7 on both sides, which leaves us with m on the left and -147 on the right. And we flipped our sign because we had to multiply by a negative. All right, then the graph down below, we're going to include -147 on the graph. We're going to put a closed circle at -147 and a line going to the right because we have a greater than symbol. All right, so that is solving and then graphing your inequality. All right, if you have any questions, feel free to comment down below. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, hit subscribe down below, click the like button, share with your friends. Have a good day.